her, but she is my assistant and does such a beautiful job. But I came home and told her we were going to be hosting this meeting, and she said, "You mean right after our trustee meeting and right before homecoming?" I said, "Yes, but Pat's done extraordinary work, and would you join me in thanking her for all her efforts?"
We certainly appreciate the invitation. Everything's working great, and we're just enjoying being here. Beautiful campus. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. We thought we would have about 15 minutes here so Cato could talk about the results of Memphis football.
It won't take that long, Mr. Chairman. We are ecstatic. It's been 25 years, so I'll take it at that and hope we don't blow it when we go to toss tomorrow.
Okay. And you probably, board members will recognize that we've got a number of new staff members here, and I've asked Sarah to kind of introduce the staff members that we have so that we can all keep up with names and like faces and this kind of thing. So Sarah?
I promise not to quiz you later, but we are expanding. I'm excited to introduce a growing team at the State Board office. Lee Cummins, down here to my left, has joined us recently, working primarily on our standards review committee work. And I know a lot of the folks in the room that will be speaking about some of our math course changes and other work know Lee well. But we're excited to have her join on the policy team. We also have Mackenzie Manning, who's in the back here, who's joined us as our coordinator of communications, and she's been invaluable already in helping us on a number of fronts around external relations, working a lot with Nathan on some of that. And then I believe Ari Goldstein is working on our some of our BEP work in another room, but he is with us too, and hopefully most of the board members have gotten a chance to meet him. He's a policy fellow who's joining us for a year, also working closely with Nathan on both policy and legislative affairs. And I think that's all. There'll be a quiz later.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Sarah. Very good. We'll move to the items on our agenda, the 120 item, the individualized education program. Rebecca, you have that?
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Wright. I am the director of the Individualized Education Accounts Program for the Tennessee Department of Education. And I want to thank you all for the opportunity to present about the new rules for the program that we will be proposing for the board's approval on first read tomorrow. We have been working over the past couple of months since the legislation was passed with the State Board of Education staff to draft these rules, and we're really excited that we have them to propose before you all tomorrow. One of the key features of these rules is to get public input and engaged feedback from the stakeholder groups that really have been working around this legislation this past year. And so as part of that process, the State Board of Education is going to be hosting a rulemaking hearing November the 12th at Legislative Plaza to hear public comment on the rules. We also have been receiving, or have the ability to receive public comment through email, and we haven't received any yet, but we are hoping that over the next couple of weeks we will have some feedback, and we will use that feedback to inform the rules that will be proposed at final read in January. Also, the external advisory group that the department has formed met and reviewed these rules last week, and so as we go through this presentation, I will make note of any edits or revisions that they recommended that we bring to the board in the January meeting as well. One note, there was a question at the last meeting about when the program was going to be implemented, and so I wanted to start off with providing you all an update on that front. So after reviewing the timeline of when the rules would be finalized and when they would go into effect, the program will actually begin. Students will be able to enroll in the program January 1st of 2017, and the application period would open on August 1st or 2nd of 2016, excuse me. So there's going to be a basically one semester enrollment period for that first year, and then after that it would be a yearly enrollment. And the reason again for this is so that we have time to have the rules officially promulgated, and then the department can post the application information for parents after those rules are officially finalized. All right, and I'm going to go through a brief overview of the rules. So the rules are about 9 pages long. You've all seen them, and so what I'm going to focus on is a high-level overview and then provide a lot of time at the end for questions. The rules have specific topics, and so I'll try to go over the high-level topics, the things that would stand out the most, and those are about questions about student eligibility, qualification and approval process for the providers and schools that will be participating, the definitions for the approved expenses, as well as the financial safeguards, appeals procedures, and conflict of interest section. So again, I'll be going through this a little bit fast, but at the end, I hope to have enough time to be able to answer all of your questions. Okay, so to begin with, student eligibility. So in the law, there are specific requirements set for students who would be able to enroll in this program. These are listed on the screen. One of them is that students must either have previously been enrolled in a public school system for 2 semesters prior to enrolling, or they would be a student who has never been enrolled in a Tennessee school, or they would have been enrolled in the program the previous school year. So we received a lot of questions about, well, what does 2 semesters in a public school mean? What does new to Tennessee mean? Are kindergarten students eligible? And what we try to do in the rules is to flesh out all 3 of those definitions. So for the first one, prior to semesters enrollment in the public school would mean that the student was being counted in the district's enrollment for the purposes of calculating their funding in months 2, 3, 6, and 7, which basically means a student would have to be enrolled for an entire school year in a public school in order to be eligible to enroll in the IEA program. The second piece is kindergarten students. So kindergarten students would be eligible to enroll in the IEA program. They would have to register with their system, their local school district, in order to be put on the books to generate funding, but they would never actually have to attend class in a public school. They would just have to register with their district. They would have to get an IEP before enrolling in the program, and students who are not enrolled in kindergarten students are eligible to receive an IEP through their school system. The third piece are students new to Tennessee. So students who moved to the state or brand new would also be eligible to enroll. They would use their state's IEP, the state that they're coming from, as their determination for whether they're eligible for the program, and then they would also register with their local school district, but they would never actually have to attend classes. All right, so I'm going to move on to the process to enroll students in the IEA program. So when parents are looking about how to enroll in the program, the first thing we want to make very clear to them is that they are going to be waiving all their IDEA rights, which means they are solely responsible for the education of their child once they enroll in the program. We wanted to make sure that the process was as streamlined and easy as possible for parents to be able to enroll, so we're proposing a 3-step process. 1, the parents would apply to the department. We would determine whether they were eligible based on the eligibility criteria listed in the law and the rules, and then we would notify the parent. Once the parent was determined that the student was eligible, then the parent would sign a contract with the department for 1 year for that student to participate in the program. That contract would ensure that parents would sign an agreement saying that they would be responsible for the education of their child and that they are aware that the public school system would not be required or have any responsibilities to educate their children. They would also list the schools that they intend on enrolling their child in, which could also include a home education program, and then clearly mark off that they understand each of the responsibilities listed as part of this program. So a parent would be very aware before signing the application, once they sign the application, and then once they sign the contract, there are going to be multiple places for them to have to assure that they know the responsibilities they're taking on as part of this program for educating their child. Once the parent completes the contract, they would submit it to the department. We would then approve the contract if everything was submitted correctly, and the parent would receive their first quarterly payment. The parent would then renew the contract every single year. And it would be a streamlined contract, but they would still, again, be agreeing to comply with all of the rules, regulations, and laws for their child. Once a child is in the program, they can transfer from one school to another. They would just notify the department. One of the proposed rules is that if a child was enrolled in a private school as part of this program, they had already paid their tuition and fees up front, that school would have to refund those fees and tuition on a prorated basis back to the parent. And that's to ensure that if a parent was going to transfer that child from one school to another, that they would have those funds back in their account to be able to use at that next school. So it's really a safeguard for parent. It's also a safeguard for the department that if that child prepays for those funds, and then they end up returning back to the school district, that those funds go back into the state treasury for us to be able to go and pay those funds to the local school district. Students may also withdraw from the program at any time. So there will be a one window for them to apply and enter into the program. For next year, it will be open on August 1st. Normally, going forward for a full school year, that will open sometime in the spring. And so there will be a one period of application time for them to be able to enroll. But they can withdraw from the program at any time during that school year. They would just notify the Department of Education, and then once they return to their district, if they chose to return to their district, they could request that their district complete an initial evaluation for their students' eligibility. So basically, look at whether the child would be eligible for new services and accommodations in the local school system. A child could also withdraw from the program and stay enrolled in their private school or home school. They wouldn't necessarily have to return to the LEA, but this is in case they do, they would be eligible to receive an initial evaluation for eligibility for services. Students, there may be situations that students would need to be removed from the program, and that would be in the cases of substantial fraud and abuse. Now, we don't anticipate that happening very often, but in the case that there were situations like that, the department would need the authority to be able to remove that child or parent from the program and then potentially freeze those funds. So the rules would give us that ability. There is also a provision in the rules, and I'll go through this a little bit later, about the appeals process. So any decisions by the department, including removal, would be able to be appealed by the parent or school. All right, approved use of funds. So parents get these funds in 4 equal quarterly payments. The department is working on figuring out what that account system will look like, and we should have an update for you all at your next meeting, hopefully. Once parents get those funds, they do submit receipts to the department. One of the proposed rules is that once they get that first quarterly payment, thereafter, before they receive their second and third and fourth quarterly payments, they would have to submit to us their receipts and expense reports. So we wouldn't dispense payment number 2 until we had their expense report and receipts for all the funds they expended for quarter number 1. There's also some general guidelines that are partially in law and partially in rule. Parents would be able to have these funds continue to roll over in their account. They can use these funds for post-secondary expenses. So theoretically, if there are funds left over in the student's account upon graduation, they could use those funds for post-secondary. One of the things that we are proposing is that they there be a limit of 90%, where they have to spend 90% of their funds each year. And if they don't spend 90%, then those funds would be deducted from the next payment. The reason behind this is to ensure that parents spend the majority of their funds on K-12 education expenditures while they're in the program. We have received some feedback, both from the external advisory group and some state legislators as well, concerning this provision. So we're studying this issue. We're looking at what other states are doing, and we may be bringing some revisions to this particular piece for the final read of the rules. There are other states that do have something similar, so we're looking and we're going to be studying that. Once a student graduates from high school, they would be eligible to continue to use these funds, but we're proposing that they have a cap of 4 subsequent years after graduation or upon aging out of the program to use those funds. If funds are misspent, the Department of Education would notify the parent, and then the proposed rules would give the department the ability to freeze or withdraw funds from the account to repay those funds. And again, a parent could potentially appeal that decision if they felt that those decisions were not accurate. We also thought it was important to include a conflict of interest. So parents who enrolled in this program would not be able to pay themselves with these funds. Neither would they be able to pay members of their own household. In addition, if a parent was, let's say, a physician, they would not be able to provide a professional recommendation for their child. So in the case of computer hardware, a child would need a physician's approval or department approval in order to use funds for computer hardware. This would require that the parent or student go to someone other than someone in the family. So a child's father could not be their physician that recommended that they use a certain computer hardware for these funds. Participating schools and providers eligibility is something that we've been researching very deeply. It's a question we get asked a lot about. one of the things that we're looking at, and the difficulty here, is to try to find a way that we can set a threshold for quality that's going to ensure that students are going to be able to use these funds to attend participating schools, as well as therapists and tutors that meet a threshold of quality that would ensure that they are receiving a quality education or services. And so in looking at the definition of participating school, we are proposing that they be limited to categories 1, 2, and 3 non-public schools. So a school, in order to receive funds through this program, to receive funding for tuition and fees, would have to be a category 1, 2, or 3. Now, a parent could enroll their child in a category 4, 5, or 6 non-public school, but they wouldn't be able to use these funds for tuition and fees. The schools, if they were interested in applying and participating in this program, they would apply to the department. We would review their application. Included in that application, they would need to let us know the maximum number of students they intended to enroll, and also report their students and schools' fee schedules. This is important for us when we're going back to that refund of their tuition and fees. If that were to happen, we would be able to look and see how much funding the students were going to be spending on tuition and fees, as well as when parents submit their expense reports. Another point we wanted to clarify is the definition of inclusive educational settings. And so we're proposing that that includes students with disabilities who are educated with non-disabled children, and that no more than 50% of the students in the classroom would have to be students with disabilities. Now again, a school would not have to have inclusive educational settings in order to participate, but if they did have inclusive educational settings, if they met those criteria, we would include that on the published list that the department will be posting on our website to inform parents about which schools provide those inclusive educational settings. Schools must also verify students' continued enrollment. So they will be sending to the department reports of which students are enrolled in their schools who are receiving IEA funds. And that's so that we can cross-check their reports with the student reports to make sure those students are actually enrolled in those schools. They will also be required to provide parents a report of their child's progress and administer statewide assessments if requested by the parent. Schools will have to conduct criminal background checks, as well as providers will have to conduct criminal background checks of all their employees. That would include a check by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation that would also be forwarded as part of the Child Protection Act, and would include a review of the Sex Offender Registry and the Abuse Registry. Another important piece was the idea of financial viability for schools. So in the proposed rules, schools would have to demonstrate their financial viability. One of the ways that they could do this would be by submitting to the department a surety bond. We're looking and studying the best way to actually go through that process, but it would probably be an annual bond that schools would submit. And then they would also be required to submit to us an annual audit if it was requested by the department. But it wouldn't be something they would have to do unless they were requested. And the audit would be limited to the funds related to the IEA program itself. Finally, there would be a provision that would allow the department to remove a school from participating in the program or a provider. If that were to happen, the department would notify the school. The student, if they were enrolled in the schools, would also be notified, and then they would be able to continue to stay enrolled in that school for the remainder of the year until the school was officially removed from the program the next year. And again, schools will be able to appeal these decisions as well to the department. Finally, educational therapies and services is the other piece of the provider rules section. So we've proposed a few definitions for educational therapies and participating providers. Some of the feedback from the external advisory group was around the definition of educational therapies, so we're going to be tweaking that definition and bringing it back to you all. But the definition for participating provider is basically that the Department of Education and the Tennessee Department of Health will be working on creating licensure requirements for these providers, and those will be included in the department's procedures. If a therapy or services provider wanted to participate in this program, they wouldn't actually contract with the department. It would be a contract with a parent and a therapist, and the parent would have to submit to the department an explanation of why this therapy was meeting their child's educational needs. Because going back to the definition of therapy, it has to be an educational therapy, and so we would be checking those reports from parents to ensure that that was, in fact, an educational therapy. And that's the only piece that they would have to submit, along with whatever licensure requirements or certifications their therapist has that would meet the department's procedures. For tutors, a child could either be tutored by an individual tutor or a tutoring organization. Tutoring organization would have to be accredited by one of these regional accrediting organizations, and or the tutor, if it's an individual, would have to meet certain licensure or accreditation requirements. And again, the department is working on creating those, and we will be including those in the procedures as well. Finally, there are a host of other types of expenses that they can use these funds for. I won't go through these one by one, but some of them are like online learning programs and courses. They would have to be Category 3 schools. Curriculum would have to be a complete course of study. And then transportation would have to be to and from a participating provider. It would not be able to be used for parents providing services or transportation. Parents could also use these funds to purchase computer hardware. The definition of computer hardware would pretty much allow any computer hardware to be used so long as it's being used for an educational purpose, as well as a technological device would fall under that same definition. The department is researching what technological and computer hardware devices may not fall under this criteria, and so we can provide some guidance to parents if they ask. But as for the definition, it's pretty broad at this point, and we'll be defining it more closely in the procedures. Post-secondary institutions would also include any of the institutions in Tennessee, community colleges, University of Tennessee systems, as well as private post-secondary institutions in Tennessee or outside of Tennessee, as long as they are accredited by one of the regional accrediting organizations listed on the screen. And finally, the proposed appeals rules. So we thought it was important that if a decision was made by the department, either for a parent purpose or a student purpose or a participating school or provider, that they would be able to appeal those decisions. And so there is going to be a two-step appeals process proposed in the rules. They would be able to appeal any decision made by the department. And that process would simply be that they would submit a form to the department. We would review it, and the form would have to be submitted within 10 business days of the decision. The Commissioner of Education or her designee would review it and render a decision within 30 calendar days, and the decision would be rendered within 10 days. And then if the parent or school further disagreed with that decision, they could go through a second step and appeal it following the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act. So those are all the rules, and that was very quick, and I know I went through that very quickly, but there's a lot, and so I want to pause here and just stop and ask if you all have any questions. I would be happy to answer them.
I have a lot, so I don't know if you want to, if you want me to do one and then wait and then do another one and then wait. Yes, absolutely.
She ain't gonna get her turn.
Oh,
Let's
I'll check yours off my list.
My question, my overall question, it has to do with the administration of this new program. Because there's so many pieces to this, and I know on the cover sheet for this item, it says that the LEAs will not have any physical impact on the LEA. But the department is going to have a huge role
Yes.
in this, and I'm just wondering where the funds are coming from. Do we have additional staff coming? This may be a question for the commissioner about how the department will handle this.
So for year one, for this first year, since we're in the program development stage, the department has been given as part of the state budget approximately $350,000 to administer or develop the program this first year. After that, the department is going to receive a 4% administrative fee from each of the accounts that are awarded. So 4% would be taken out of each of the students' funding, and that would go to pay for the program moving forward. There is a team of 3 right now at the department, including myself. I have 2 staff members. One's an administrative assistant and an account specialist for the program. And then if we get additional students enrolled in the program beyond the initial projections, we'd be able to grow that team based on the number of students who are participating. So the more students, the more funding we would receive based on the administrative fee.
The other question I had is, discuss a little bit about the interest you're finding in this program, and can you kind of describe the types of students that you think are most likely to be trying to take advantage of this account?
So we haven't received a whole lot of interest in the program yet. We have received probably a dozen phone calls or emails from parents directly. I think a lot of parents are actually reaching out to their local special education advocacy organizations because they have been doing a tremendous job about getting information out about this program very early, and we've been working with them on those pieces as well. So we anticipate that interest in the program is going to ramp up once the rules are created, once the procedures are out there, and once we have more information about the application process. So probably next spring or early next summer, once more parents become familiar with the program. As far as whether parents who would utilize this program and what their rationale would be for entering into the program, it would really depend on the parent themselves. So they might be in a situation where they would like to utilize therapies or services that their system doesn't provide, and so they would like to enter into this program to pay for those services or therapists, or maybe there's a private school that they would like their child to attend, and so it may be that they're in a school system that they like the school system, but there are other private options that they would like to use, and so this funding would allow them to do that. There also may be situations where they want to stay enrolled, they like their public school services, but they also want to utilize those other private school services. Part of this program would allow them to enter into this program, use funding for private school services, and then contract with their districts to provide services as well. So you may see some parents who are just completely satisfied where they are, but they find another option that works better for their child, or maybe they're having some difficulties getting the services that they want, and so they feel like this would be a better option for them. But these are the disability categories are some of the most severely disabled children, so it really is a special population.
Okay. Can we let Wendy go now?
Yes, I guess.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, first of all, for all of this work on this. I know you're creating something brand new, and so I really commend you on the detail. So I went through the proposed rule and just jotted, so I'm just going to go in the order. It's not going to make a lot of sense order-wise, but it's the order in the rule. I asked you in the August meeting, I guess, whether there had been a determination yet on the eligible student definition, whether it's primary diagnosis on an IEP, whether it could be secondary, and I believe your answer was that was still yet to be decided. They were leaning towards it being any, if it was an identified disability at all, whether primary or secondary. Is that?
Yes, that's correct. So it would be either primary or secondary.
And is the rule going to specify that so that parents understand that? Because that might be a good idea.
It doesn't specify in the rules, but we could potentially add it to the parent handbook, since it wouldn't have to be a rule that would need to be passed, but we could clarify that in the parent handbook that we'll be creating.
Okay, that would be great. The participating provider definition, and you mentioned it in the slides, talks about an application and approval process created by the Department of Ed and Health, Departments of Education and Health. Is that process going to be part of the rule as well? And when will potential providers know what that process is so that they can figure that out?
So one of the things when we were looking at what to put in rule versus what to put in procedure is what things we may need to tweak throughout the year. And so with the procedures, we would be able to tweak those on an ongoing basis. We definitely would be able to revise the rules or potentially propose revisions to the rules, but since that process takes longer, some things we thought would probably go better in procedures, and that's one of them. So we're going to be working with the Department of Health and have those provisions included in the draft procedures hopefully early next year. So once the rules get finalized on second read, if they are approved on final read, then we would be able to have the procedures out very quickly after that for public review as well.
That time, remind me, so, and again, I know I'm not holding you when they would be out, but if they were out in that ideal timeline, how much time is that before students are actually being served by these providers?
So it would be not quite a year, but almost a year, and it'd be 6 months before the application window opened for schools.
Okay.
3 to 6 months.
Great, thank you. And then you, in here twice, maybe more, the application, and then I guess the continuation, annual continuation requirements look like it is for them to complete procedures and to do the application available on the department's website. We talked at that last meeting about my concern about some families that don't have web access aren't, is there going to be another method to apply? Are schools going to have applications? How are you going to handle families that just don't have the the luxury of having computer access?
So we are going to have a paper form for this. The one, I think for the application that would work well, the one area that it would not work so well is for the expense reports and receipt submission, because that's a lot of stuff to mail. So would probably want to work with the parents and find if there's maybe a local library that they could go to, or somewhere that they could get access to be able to upload that information, or possibly do it on their smartphones, because you can take pictures of receipts with your smartphone. So we're checking into all the technology abilities around that front.
Would that be something you would include in the parent handbook?
Yes.
Okay. I promise I'm getting there, Philly. This is important stuff. So, on the monitoring and compliance, is it going, and I know you mentioned some of it here, but I mean, is it gonna be delineated somewhere, like actual responsibility for that? Because it seems, and I know necessarily it may at this point need to be vague, but it seems really vague who's gonna be making sure that everybody's following what they're supposed to be following. I mean, is there an intent to have very specific lanes for that?
For the parents, there will be specific outline requirements and responsibilities for what they would need to be doing at every step of the way. So from what their initial application responsibilities would be, the real bulk of their responsibilities would be submitting the quarterly expense reports. And then at the end of the year, they would also have like an assessment verification that they'd submit to us if their child was in grades 3 through 8 and they were taking those assessments, or if they wanted to reapply and re-enroll in the program. So all of those will be clearly outlined in a step-by-step guide in the parent handbook. We're also looking into creating a provider handbook that would include all of the responsibilities and requirements providers would have to follow.
Okay. You mentioned the inclusive settings. Will there, and you said that was just, when you post it, you'll be able to say they have an inclusive setting at this particular school.
Yes.
If they meet your definition. Will there be any preference in for approving programs that have inclusive settings, or is that just purely informational?
It's purely informational for the parents. If students withdraw or terminated, or their program is terminated and it's the end of the school year, is there a system in place to ensure that the students go back to school somewhere, like re-enroll in public school, or somehow covered in the education of the kids? So part of this, they're either end of the year requirements. If they want to withdraw from the program, they would have to report to us where they were going, next steps, or if they were re-enrolling in the program, they also would be reporting what schools they would be attending. And this program does not affect the current compulsory attendance laws that's already in place with the state. So they would still have to follow all of those rules.
And then it mentions in here that one of the things schools and providers shall do, so it's a mandate, is be academically accountable to the parent for meeting educational needs. And one of the things was cooperating with the student whose parent chooses to participate in the assessment, so that is not going to be a requirement.
So the law requires that if a child is in grades 3 through 8, they have to take an English language arts and math assessment. They could either choose a norm reference assessment, which we would have a list of those available in the procedures, or they could choose to take the state test. That provision means that if a child was enrolled in a private school and the parent wanted the child to take the state test, that the private school would have to work with the state to be able to provide that assessment. And that is a regular occurrence now. Private schools contract with the state to purchase the state tests and administer those tests to the children.
But for students on this program, it would be a choice of the parent. I know they're in a private
Right.
school and normally the parents don't, but even though they're getting the tax dollars, they're not required to take the state test, is what you're saying.
Right, so they would, if they're in grades 3 through 8, they would have to take a test, but they could choose either norm reference or the state test.
Okay. I'm really almost done. So students leave and go to a private placement or, homeschool and get private setting. You utilize this program. They come back to the public school setting. My reading of this, and you mentioned earlier, and that's why I think it's so important, that these are a lot of sort of high needs categories.
Yes.
It says here that it appears to be that only if the parents request in writing that evaluations be done, that the student wouldn't then go through the IEP process. I mean, is there a way to strengthen that language so that, like child find, so if a student with a profound disability returns to the district and the parent doesn't send a written request, that student still needs to be afforded the rights under IDEA, right? I
Right,
mean,
so
worry about that.
this program does not affect any of the laws that are already in place related to a child being able to receive services through their local school system once they re-enroll in the district. So a student who re-enrolled in the district, even though they are coming from this program, would really be coming from a private school or a homeschool. And so they would be treated like any other private or homeschool student who is entering into that district. This just, I think, is more to help parents understand that they do have that ability to request that.
Extra protection, not
Yes.
a requirement, okay. My last question, the appeal process and a lot of these other things, so when a child in a district school goes to an IEP meeting, when a family goes, they get this big, thick rights booklet, right? That explains, these are your rights, due process, you know, you have the right to all, is there any, plan to give students for these families a book of their, is that gonna be in the parent handbook? Like
Yes.
what their rights are for appeal purposes and how that works and like,
Yes, that will be all fleshed out in the parent handbook.
okay. Those are all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mike?
Wendy just mentioned homeschooling. That's a permitted reimbursable?
So the parent would not be able to use these funds for tuition through a homeschool. It would have to be either one of the other categories like curriculum or therapy or services. But a child could be an independent homeschool student enrolled in this program.
Okay, other questions? Any other questions? Okay, Rebecca, thank you, appreciate it. Good job. Okay, we'll now move to the State Board of Education Master Plan. We've got a couple of items on our agenda for tomorrow dealing with that. One is the Vision Strategic Priorities item on final reading, and then also some drafting work that's been done on the actual master plan. Sarah, you want to
Yes,
kick it off?
I'm happy to, and if it's okay with the board, I'll stay where I am, because the chairman and I have been discussing this a lot together, and I'm going to defer to him on a few points as well. But as he mentioned, you'll vote tomorrow on final reading about the vision statement and the 5 priority areas that we've been discussing for the last 6 to 8 months. But in addition, what you have before you on item 2G for first reading represents our best attempt to put together a master plan document building on the discussions that we've been having as a board around those 5 priority areas, and attempting to think both about student achievement goals that as a state we want to set and track towards over the next 5 years, as well as the policy pieces that we want to focus on as a board. And in discussing this with the chairman, the structure you have in front of you is twofold. Again, looking at the high-level student achievement goals that we've been discussing a lot with the department and other state agency and stakeholders. So you'll recognize those 3 student achievement goals likely from the department's strategic plan. In our discussions, we felt like it was important to align our vision for student success as much as possible with our other state partners. And these 3 goals, one on NAEP, one on ACT and potentially SAT attainment, as well as post-secondary, really reflect as a state where we want to go over the next 5 years in terms of student achievement. And I'll talk through those as the board desires. But then the second part of the master plan really looks at the strategic priority areas that again are before you on final reading, and attempts within each of those policy areas to think about the key levers that as a board we want to focus on over the next calendar year, acknowledging that each year we'll need to revisit this and be clear about our focus and where we think we can have the greatest impact on student achievement within the policy landscape. So for example, the first strategic priority, serve all students, the key lever that we'd be looking at this year is the individual education accounts that we've just been discussing. Clearly there's a lot of work involved in getting that program up and running, and passing that rule is a key function of the board. I'll be helping with that rulemaking hearing later in November. We also want to make sure that we have a really strong research plan to study that program in its infancy and bring back to the board and to stakeholders information about the descriptives of the types of students and parents who enroll, the kinds of programs that participate. There's a lot there that we need to look at as a state in that first year. So again, trying to be clear about the policy focus areas for this next calendar year under each one of those strategic priority areas that we think will have the greatest impact on student achievement. Acknowledging that, again, the board's charge is very broad, and as we've discussed over the last number of months now, really focusing on where we think our policies will have the biggest impact on student achievement seems to be an important sort of focusing exercise. So real quickly, I'll go through a few more of the highlights from the various priority areas, and then would love feedback and comments. This is a work in progress, and we won't be bringing it back to you until January for final reading, so I would love any board members' input on what you have before you. The second priority area, again, just to highlight a few more things, high quality school options. We'll be talking a lot more about here in just a few moments around the charter appeal and authorizing role that the board plays. And because, especially the authorizing role is still relatively new, there are still charter policies that the board's working to approve and develop. So that continues to be a focus for us under that high quality school options priority area. The third priority area, great teachers and leaders. We talked a bit about this earlier today with our panel discussion that Dr. Trout facilitated. The teacher prep report card, and knowing that that is in statute a state board charge, we've talked a lot about the need to redesign that report card with stakeholder engagement so that it really reflects the promising best practices and the areas that we really need to address as a state around the quality of providers in the teacher prep arena. Under the next priority area, high standards and quality measures. We're doing a lot of work this year on the standards review process, as everyone knows, and so acknowledging that there's a lot that we are trying to codify around a high quality review process. You'll have the pleasure of hearing from some of our really talented educators here this afternoon about some of how that work is going, but we know that that will continue to be a big focus for us over the next year as we look to science and social studies as well. And then finally, and I'll stop and we can discuss the last priority area around transparency, public engagement, and oversight, and again, a real focus for this board, being clear that we want to take a deep, reflective look at our current policies and what we're calling a policy audit, make sure that we're both addressing and updating key policies in a timely way, and that we're doing that with an eye towards student achievement and where can we be most influential in terms of ensuring our policies are aligned to student success, as well as reporting out on our engagement opportunities and budget information. So again, just making sure that we are upholding our promise to the public to be very transparent and to look at those policies on a regular basis and update where needed. So I'll stop there, Chairman. I don't know if you want to add anything from our conversations about sort of the structure and sort of the take.
Yeah, I think I guess basically, I think the structure that we've got here is good. The thing that would be most interested in, and we've tried to look at how we could schedule, is sometime that the board could really spend some quality time, and I'm talking about, 3 or 4 hours at least, of going through these and discussing them and really understanding what they mean and identifying other things that may need to be added to it. But really, I get to the point where the board really, I guess, internalizes or is very familiar with what's in this master plan. Now, the challenge we've got is all the other things we've got on our agenda, with this agenda and with the charter schools, and we know in January we're going to have to spend a lot of time on standards and so forth, that it doesn't look like we're going to find much time in connection with our regular meetings. That if we were to try to schedule something to really spend some time on the master plan, it would have to be a special meeting. This time of year, between now and the end of the year, is not a good time to try to schedule, additional meetings and so forth. So I guess I would like to get any thoughts you might have on whether it would be valuable to try to schedule that sometime, and I think it most likely would need to be sometime after the first of the year, but would like to get your thoughts about that or about the structure that we've got in place here. Yeah, Cato.
Mr. Chairman, I think you just articulated the one concern I had, that if this is going to be a living document that we as a board has to live with and understand, we need to spend some quality time really deep diving into it, because the plan is only as good as the board understands it. We have to live with it, but also we have to be able to articulate this to the public. And if we're going to do that, we need to understand all the parts that's in it. I think you said it very well. We have so much on the plate, but I do think we need to do that. I think it's something we need. This cannot be staff putting it together and we hold staff responsible. We're responsible. We're the board.
Okay, good. Appreciate that. Other comments? Mike?
I couldn't agree more, and it's sort of a priority, so important that if we can work it in sooner than later, then that's a good thing. One of the pieces on the goals, I think these goals are outstanding, and they're outstanding as push goals, particularly coming out of the chute. 20 years from now, I hope these goals are higher, but right now, these things are going to be a stretch to attain as it is. So I compliment Sarah and staff on these. Couple of things in regard to the goals. 21 is a good indicator for post-secondary training, whether it's going into college or going into two-year or certificate training, military, whatever. But that number is a composite of 4 other numbers, and each one of them are individually important as those indicators, because you could get to 21 by being elevated in one area and too low in the other, and you're going to have a failure point out there because of that superficial low. So I would like to see whether it is a specific goal or not, or just something reported of the trajectory of those. And, well, the other thing is, and this is, somehow, for this stuff to be meaningful to us, as Cato said, I would like for, and I know we're actually working on this, but it's going to be important for us to see significant indicators that that we're able to see that will allow us to kind of predict what that, for example, ACT score is going to be when it actually is calculated. And those indicators are known far better than you guys and me, but if third grade reading will impact how that ultimate score is going to be, to some extent, we ought to probably look at those and kind of say, so it's, when we get this thing, it's not a fait accompli. It is something that can inform us and to ask knowledgeable questions, particularly of the department. The strategic priorities are dead on, in my opinion. Let me ask a question about on great teachers and leaders on the teacher prep report card. Let's say that we're able to really develop a comprehensive, definitive report card that we receive. What do we do with it then?
In terms of the report card, the annual report card itself? I think it's a question that we can continue to answer differently over time. Right now, it's just sort of a public reflection of those measures. We've attempted, you all have attempted as a board, I think, to create a policy that draws on those measures more directly for the accountability on programs and their ongoing review process. I know Amy Wooten's going to be talking a little bit later today about some of the work that her team has been leading on that front, but the policy that you all passed last October attempts to pull a lot of the metrics that are in our current report card and use them for the ongoing review and approval of programs. But I think that has been one of the biggest questions with that report card over time, is that it's great to have it, it's great to have a public-facing report, but what does it really mean, and how do we use that data in some of the other accountability policies?
I would hope that we develop one that is a useful tool to us, useful tool to the college prep program, or education prep programs, and a useful tool to the consumers, particularly those students who are about to enroll and take out a student loan and spend their money in hopes of getting trained for a great career. They need to be able to look at these programs and make a decision based on some criteria that's informative.
Just a final comment there. My hope is to begin that work to redesign the report card in earnest as soon as we get this year's report card out, which is a little bit of a lift because we're still understaffed on that front. But at the next meeting, I'll be excited to introduce to you someone on the research side of things who's accepted an offer but hasn't joined us yet. And one of his primary responsibilities will be working on the teacher prep report card in partnership with the department and THEC. So I agree. I think we really need to look at that opportunity. And I hope Dr. Trout's still willing to help lead some working groups on that, because I do think that needs to begin in earnest as soon as we can staff up.
Okay, Lillian?
My comment centers around the fact, first of all, I do agree with the you say under great teachers and leaders as an example, 3B, evaluation flexibility. So one could say, well, what are we talking about? If we say licensure, exams, supply and demand, what do we really mean by that? So we can all have our own individual interpretations of what a statement really ultimately means. And while I do not want to create a lot of extra work for people, I do think we have to have more documentation and more language around what does each of these really mean, and that we're not going to misinterpret it, because if we misinterpret it, then other people could certainly misinterpret it as well.
I appreciate that greatly, Lillian, and I completely agree. And I think collectively, the comments that I'm hearing, if the board is willing, we will do a poll and try to find some time to come together for a more extended period as a board, because I think our staff can certainly flesh these things out. And I think we'll need to have at least two versions of the master plan, one that's high level and can be consumed sort of at that 30,000 foot view, but then another that really speaks to the detail that we mean when we say evaluation flexibility. I completely agree. So I think we could aspire to bring that level of detail to a more extended conversation on this master plan before you vote on final reading. Just means more time together, so I hope you guys are ready to entertain us on that front.
And I do have one minor suggestion that you change initially on page 1, goal 1, sentence number 3. Through the state board's mission, we, rather than hope to see, we expect to see. Just stronger language around what we're saying there. We expect to see.
Great suggestion, thank you.
Okay, other comments?
Chairman, I
Bill?
think you hear everybody eager to get to work on this. I do think we've got a wonderful framework to address our priority areas, and anyway, we need to get ahead. We'll start on it in January. I know we've got a full agenda. It would be great.
Great, well, I'll look to Phyllis to help me do a poll on times, but it could be that we see if it works to come in a little early for that January meeting and tack that on to
Good.
the meeting that we'll be having, and just try to front load that.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, appreciate that feedback. One of the things we'll want to do, proposed kind of assignments for the various board members here. I haven't gotten any rejections in terms of the things I suggested, but that's one of the things I'd like to add to that time in January, to kind of firm up, what we're kind of asking each one of the board members to follow closely, be the expert on this kind of thing. So I think that would be good. And also, I'd like to make sure that each one of the board members has an opportunity to review in depth the department's strategic plan. In Kansas, I think that y'all did a great job of putting that together. I think we're going to have some hard copies of that we can get out to everybody. I think you've gotten an email with it, and it's well done, and I think we need to be very familiar with that strategic plan as we proceed with this work. Any other comments here? Okay, we'll move to our next agenda item, which is the Tennessee Ready. And
Good afternoon. I'm Tammy Shelton with the department.
And I'm Nakia Towns, also with the Department of Ed.
Dr. Towns and I would like to give a brief update on TN Ready this afternoon. As you know, this is the first year for TN Ready during this school year. In fact, within about a little over a week, we will have the first operational window open for high school block courses. So we're very close to rolling out the operational assessment. Tennessee TN Ready replaces the old multiple choice only test that we've administered in English Language Arts and Mathematics for grades 3-11. It will also include a variety of question types as well as a writing portion. TN Ready provides true information about student readiness for post-secondary work. It also provides actionable information for parents and educators to help support student growth. The development of TN Ready has been by Tennessee educators to really better assess student knowledge, as well as critical thinking and problem-solving skills. So in short, TN Ready will assess things that students need to be ready after high school. The things that I just mentioned very briefly, we're going to go into in a little bit more detail. TN Ready is engaging and more engaging for our students than our old TCAP test. In reading and writing, students will actually read from multiple texts and they will provide written responses to what they have read in various ways. There will be in part 1, which we'll get into more detail, and I will show you an example to where students actually write an extended response. They also will answer text-dependent questions on some questions, and that would be something as simple as that students would actually look for their answer in the text that they are reading. In mathematics, students are going to solve multiple step problems to show what they know, and oftentimes they will solve problems without using a calculator. Students will use a variety of ways to show what they know on Tennessee Ready. This is very similar to what they do now in their classrooms with their teachers. Tennessee Ready also will be administered in 2 parts. Part 1. On Part 1 of English Language Arts for TN Ready, you will see a writing sample. This will be very similar to what you're used to in the writing assessment and will be administered during the traditional time period that we've seen the writing assessment as well. In Part 1 for mathematics, this will include a performance task in 3-8 math. The performance task will be open-ended responses, and students will actually have multi-steps to the problems that they will solve. This will really help students show the skills that they know in a practical application. Here's a sample of a 4th grade performance task problem. Students will receive 1 performance task in 3-8 on Part 1. As you see here, there are multiple parts to this example. Students have a little bit of information, they have a chart, and then on Part 1, they have a question with true and false. Part 2, students would actually type in their answer. Part C, you're going to see that there would be a drop-down menu for students to select from, and then students would again in Part D type in their answer. So multiple steps and different ways to show what the student knows. Here's a Part 1 example for ELA. This is a writing prompt. Students would first, before they get the prompt, read a passage and a set of passages. Here, for 3rd grade students, the passage is going to describe the homes of moles and beavers. Then students are asked, how are the 2 homes different? How are the homes alike? After reading and pulling evidence from that passage, students are going to plan their essay and write their essay. These essays for students would be scored as a rough draft. Part 2 on TN Ready. It's the second portion of the test. Students will have multiple item types on Part 2. Where before we saw only multiple choice, students now could have multiple select to where they would select more than one answer. They could have drag and drop and various other item types. Part 2 will be administered in April, May, which has been the traditional time frame that we've seen TCAP administered. Part 1 and 2 together will be combined to give a single composite score for students. Here's an example of a previous TCAP item and one of the new TN Ready items. As you see, on the left, you have the old TCAP item. Students would have read a passage first with this item as well, and then they have a simple multiple choice answer that they would select from. The TN Ready sample starts off in a similar way. Students would read a passage first, and then they have a multiple choice item that they would select from. But TN Ready has two parts to this question. On part 2, students are asked to look back at the passage and select the section or the sentence, one or two sentences from the passage that actually supports the answer that they chose in part 1. So they're actually showing and pulling the evidence that they use to make their choice in part 1. Students have multiple tools that they can use to practice for TN Ready. TN Ready is online, and teachers and students have two choices for practice items. As you see here, one called MICA, which is Measurement Incorporated Classroom Assessment, is like an item bank. It has sample questions in MICA. Teachers can go into MICA and they can select specific items, sample questions that could possibly go with the lesson that they did that day. It could go with the unit that they just completed. They could select items that are that actually go and match a unit that they're fixing to start. So they could create things like probes, quizzes, pre-test, and they could work with their students on that. And the great thing about MICA is it's an online platform that mirrors the actual operational platform so that students get practice in that online environment and using the same tools. Like, for example, maybe a highlighter tool, maybe the notes tool that goes with the passages, so they get comfortable in that online environment and using those tools. MIST that you see here is the actual operational secure testing site. Within MIST, we have sample tests, one at each grade level and each subject, so that teachers can assign their students and they can actually go in and take a full sample test that would mirror the form of an operational test, so that students not only then get practice within the online platform and using the tool, but they also get to mimic that testing environment as well. And so both of these sample choices are available for teachers to be using now in their classrooms to prepare their students for TN Ready. We have had Tennessee educator involvement at every step of the way in the development of TN Ready. We've had both K-12 educators as well as higher education educators involved in the process. We've had Tennessee educators help us with the selection of items, with item review, bias review, the determination of the test length, the timing, composition of our forms, and scoring and reporting. So we've had educator groups involved in every step of the development through the process. And of course, going forward, we will continue to do that. We'll continue to have our Tennessee educators involved as we make changes in test design. And we will make updates to TN Ready as we get our new standards. So in the school year 17-18, when we have new math and ELA standards, we will also have TN Ready to reflect and be aligned to those new standards. We've also had higher education partnership throughout the development and the process. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we had a group of higher education faculty members that came to the department and actually reviewed the operational test for our 912 for our high school. And that group of math and ELA faculty members from institutions, not only TBR, but TCUA and UT, all three, reviewed those operational forms, and that group reported 100% that they did feel like that the TN Ready assessment was post-secondary and career ready, that our students would be able to have success if they were proficient on this exam. We also had higher education involved, if you'll remember, through the RFP process back in the fall of 2014. And we also have worked with all of these groups, TBR, TCUA, and UT, to get a commitment for helping us and being involved through the development and the process moving forward. So a couple of things that we've asked for and they've agreed to help us with is definitely vetting the assessment to make sure that we are post-secondary aligned and that we do have those expectations within the assessment, and helping us publicly communicate that. Our range finding process is just how we hand score. Also in the creation of our performance level descriptors for TN Ready, and then during our standard setting process that will happen in the summer of 16, so that we can determine our cut scores. And so we do have commitment to have help and a collaboration partnership through all of those pieces moving forward.
So Dr. Shelton just stepped us through the content design pieces of TN Ready. I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about the online platform and getting our schools and districts ready for that technology preparedness. So the test is being administered online, and we did offer the paper pencil backup this year, and we'll talk a little bit about the way that schools and districts responded in terms of being able to opt into the online platform. So we know that with the TN Ready assessment that this is going to help us measure those critical skills, technology skills, 21st century skills that students need. We're moving away from just the simple multiple choice, as Dr. Shelton described, and getting into all types of questions that really challenge students to demonstrate their critical thinking and problem-solving skills. So we have phased in this online assessment over the last several years, and now we've seen that our schools and districts have stepped up to say that they're ready to make this transition. So in terms of network readiness, there's really two ways to think about technology preparedness for online assessment. Not only do you need the infrastructure, but you also need the device, the actual technology that students will use to complete the assessment. So with regard to the infrastructure piece, when we initially started looking at this and preparing for this transition 3-4 years ago, many of our schools and districts did not have that internet bandwidth that was necessary. And even when we took a snapshot a year ago, you can see that we had a significant number of schools that said that they had the network infrastructure, but still a little bit to go in terms of getting almost completely there. As of the snapshot that we took at the beginning of September, we had over 99% of our schools reporting to us that they had the significant bandwidth speed necessary and the access points necessary to be able to support online assessment. So then we took a look at the device readiness. So this was the bigger challenge. How do we get those desktops, laptops, tablets, and other types of computers into students' hands to be able to support online assessment? So when we looked at this a year ago, we saw that we really did have a ways to go. There were almost 40% of schools who said that they would not have the necessary device count. Our recommendation was that you would need at least one device per 6 students in your building in order to be able to support online assessment. So when we looked at where we were at the beginning of September, we now have 90% of schools saying that they are ready to test online with the appropriate number of devices. So because of that, we didn't have any districts that came and asked for a waiver to test on paper. Our schools and districts have said this is a transition that they're ready to make. They have made the investments to do so, and they're going to launch into this new world of online assessment in Tennessee. So in thinking about how we've made sure that we are going to be able to support that transition, when we were thinking about this time 3 or 4 years ago, we did not consider that we would really have 100% of districts and schools saying we're going to be ready to test online. When we thought about it, then we said, well, maybe we'll get 60, 70% of schools to go online that first year. But now we've got nearly 100% of schools saying they're going online, which means we need to make sure our vendor, Measurement Inc., is ready to support that in terms of their web server capacity. So Dr. Shelton mentioned that the MIST platform is the online assessment platform for the operational test. And we thought that we don't want to be in the situation that many of us read in the headlines last spring when many of our states went into their online testing for the first time, and there were, to say the least, some glitches. So we decided that we would try to be proactive, and we crafted what we dubbed Break MIST Day. So we said to schools and districts, we are going to do this test run, a system stress test around the MIST platform, and try to see if we could discover and uncover some vulnerabilities in the infrastructure with our vendor before we got in an operational window. So we did that on October 1st. What we did was take a 3-hour window and compress a 4-week, what would normally be a 4-week test administration into that 3-hour window. And then on top of that, we also decided to really challenge the bandwidth by using text-to-speech on 100% of users. Text-to-speech is typically an accommodation that only a small subset of students would be using, but we said we want to fully load the system so every student had their directions in text-to-speech audio, which also challenges bandwidth. The good news is we had 110,000 students participate in that 3-hour assessment window that we had for Break Miss Day. And as a result of that, we did find that we really did max out the system for the vendor. So many of our counterparts started in East Coast time and things seemed to be swimming along. We had about 20,000 users at 8:45 East Coast time. By 9:15 East Coast time, we were at about 45,000 users, and that's when MIS severely slowed down. By 10 o'clock, we had 80,000 users logged in simultaneously. And so we were able to really show and demonstrate with the vendor that there were some server capacity issues that we needed to be able to redress and anticipate. We got a lot of good analytics from that day, and our follow-up plan is to ensure that we are in a situation where we will not have those kinds of challenges during the operational assessment. So we have taken to heart being proactive to try to plan for this transition to online assessment. In thinking about some of the benefits of why would we go to online assessment, really it's around the flexibility for schools and districts. In our historical TCAP land, we have said that everybody must test in this 5-day window, and simply we were shutting school down to be able to do that assessment during that 5-day period with paper and pencil. The good news about online administration is there's lots of flexibility and that we have longer testing windows so that schools can decide when they want to administer the assessment, and they can build that schedule around instruction. In looking at what will be the actual student experience, even though we have longer testing windows, we've really kept the student test time reasonable in terms of where we've been historically with our TCAP achievement and end of course assessments. So we have an example here for 3rd, 7th, and 11th grade, and you can see the total amount of test hours across all 4 subjects. So this anticipates all 4 subjects, ELA, math, science, and social studies, and how much time a student would typically spend on their standardized assessment program in Tennessee. This is time on task for the student, and you can see in most cases it ranges from 11 to 12 hours, and a typical school day in Tennessee is about 6.5 instructional hours for students, so less than about two days of instructional time to complete the state assessment program. This is just another look at that time broken down in terms of what it looked like in the 2014-15 school year and what the test time will look like in the 2015-16 school year. And it's about 1% of the instructional days of the 180-day calendar that most students experience. And finally, we want to talk a little bit about the kind of information and reporting that we'll be able to gather from TN Ready. So we want for our parents and families and students, as well as educators, to have more and better information about how students are performing and are they on track to post-secondary and career readiness. And so we are thinking about our reports and redesigning the reports such that they do 3 things. We want to prioritize the most important information and not overwhelm with information. We want to support families and educators in interpreting and acting on the results that students have after they perform on these assessments. And then finally, we want to offer more context around student performance. We recognize that the time and the energy that's put into the state assessment program, folks want to feel like it's worthwhile and they're getting a return in terms of what kind of information they're getting about student performance. So many of you may be familiar. This is what the current TCAP individual student report looks like for 3-8 achievement. And for most folks, I like to joke, it looks like the credit card insert that you get with all the rules and regs that most of us don't read, right? I mean, it's very overwhelming for a parent to look at that report and try to glean information around their students' performance. So we're saying no more of that, no more of the fine print. Let's move into something that seems more accessible for parents, students, students and families. And so this is just a sample mock-up. Just to give you an idea of a totally different direction that we're moving in terms of the graphic design, layout, and information around reporting. And we've actually got several versions of this. We intend to go out, do focus groups, and really get a lot of feedback around what is the most impactful information and how can we make sure that these reports are accessible for our students and families. So you can see here first in color, the most important information is extremely prominent. You notice that advanced and proficient, basic and below basic are not on this chart. We are experimenting with different names for the performance levels because for most parents, they're like, well, what does it mean to be below basic? That doesn't tell me anything about my student's performance. And so we're also trying to be very clear in terms of where that student fell in terms of that performance level. And then we're also looking on that same report, the detailed information around being able to identify next steps. I've gotten this report. My student has performed, and this student performed very well. How could we support this student to continue that kind of performance? Or if there have been deficits, what might that parent ask of the educators to be able to support their child to improve? You also see here that there's some comparative information. How did this student do compared to their school, to their district, to the rest of the state? Contextual information that parents find very valuable. And then finally, a really quick summary of the different scoring categories so a parent can quickly see where was my student at standard, at mastery, and where was my child falling below mastery such that we might need to take additional action. So this is just one version of the different mock-ups that we're experimenting with and that we're going to go out and get feedback from our parents and families to make sure that we get the right kinds of information as we transition to TN Ready. So the reporting timeline, in year one of TN Ready, we will have a little bit of a delay in terms of student results because as Dr. Shelton mentioned, we have educators who are going to come in during the summer of 2016 and help set those cut scores to determine the performance levels. So once that occurs, that's when we'll be able to move into actually creating those individual student reports for families and being able to get those into the hands of families. And we anticipate that that will happen in early fall, September, October of next year. So the reporting timeline is a little bit extended in year one, but we think it's worthwhile to take the time and the energy to design a better report as well as engage our educators in that standard setting process to set proficiency cut scores. So with that, we are able to take questions.
Questions for Dr. Towns or Shelton? Any questions?
I will say as a parent, I learned with great detail the TCAP report card and what it told me, and unfortunately what it wasn't telling me about definitions of proficiency and stuff, but it was incredibly useful. That all being said, this is light years better than that, so well done.
I think one thing too, good presentation, but the document that you put together that describes Tennessee Ready, I think is well done also, and I think it's something that board members ought to keep by your bedside in case you get questions from folks about Tennessee Ready and what it is and isn't and so forth, because I think it is a major step forward.
Mr. Chairman, one thing, excellent presentation. Great job.
Other comments, questions? Okay.
I want to clarify, and you may have said this, Dr. Towns, so I apologize if you did. Do you intend to conduct another break miss stress test day to ensure that the issues that you encountered on that one day have in fact been corrected?
So no, that's a great question, and we've actually just been contemplating this. In fact, Commissioner McQueen and myself were just having that conversation this morning. And so what we recognize is that we do have a practice test, those practice tests that we were talking about. That window is ongoing. And so in some ways, we've actually had a break miss day every day for about the past 3 days. As we move into that practice test window, in fact, just yesterday, we had 100,000 testers on the missed practice test who completed one of those practice test assessments across ELA and math. So to your point, we continue to monitor every day. Next week is the last week of the practice test window before we begin that operational window on November 2nd. And so frankly, we anticipate that every day next week we're going to have close to 100,000 users on MIST. I will tell you that earlier this week, on one of those days, Tuesday, we did have some challenges, again, with the web server that we had to go back and speak with the vendor and make some additional updates, and they finally added more web server capacity. They initially thought the issue was around the database, but then, finally they conceded that it was probably an issue of just not having enough of that bandwidth in terms of the number of servers that they had available for the traffic that they were getting. And so since then, as I said, Wednesday and Thursday, Wednesday we tested nearly 100,000 students, and I think we'll be near that number today. So we are getting a break miss day almost every day, and then we'll re-look at the whole picture as we go into the operational window and figure out if there's something we want to do in January before the February cycle opens up, which will bring all of 3-8, all grades 3-8 into the picture, whereas fall is just high school. It's just high school fall block. So great question. We're monitoring it. It is possible that if we feel like we haven't gotten to the level of performance that we're comfortable with, we may do another stress test in January to be prepped for that February window.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. Let's move forward quickly to the next item on the agenda here. We're a little bit behind schedule, but maybe Laura's going to catch us up.
All right. So good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm excited to come before you today, and I want to provide a couple of updates about the standards review process before I turn over the presentation to a tremendous group of educators that have been working with us throughout the summer. So I'm excited to report that the work to revise the math and English language arts standards is continuing to progress on track. We've worked throughout the summer with a team of nearly 50 educators to look at all of the public feedback, the nearly 130,000 reviews that came in online and 20,000 comments. And so those teams have worked all summer to take a look at that public feedback, read it comment by comment, page by page, and revise the math and English language arts standards. And so they've completed their work, the initial revisions to those standards at the beginning of October, and we've now got the revised math and English language arts standards available online for public review again. So I would encourage everyone here in the room today to share that information with their networks. That information is up online, and we'll be collecting public comment and review on those revised standards for about the next month. During that time, we're also collecting some additional external feedback about the newly revised standards. So we're working with the group of higher education faculty to review the standards, as well as doing some educator and parent roundtable conversations to collect more detailed and specific feedback directly from those groups. The Standards Recommendation Committee is also meeting throughout this time. That's the legislatively and gubernatorially appointed group of 10 that will make the ultimate recommendation to you, the board. And so they had their first meeting, their first official meeting this past Tuesday, and I'm happy to report that that meeting was really successful and that the group is feeling good about the direction of the standards, and they're excited to continue to dig into that work over the course of the next couple of months. So with all that being said, I'm now going to turn over the presentation to two different groups of the educator teams that have been working with us throughout the summer. And so they've done a tremendous job to really take a look at these standards, to go in depth. And we wanted to have them come and provide you today with just a brief update on a portion of their work. So what they're going to present on today, we'll have a group of math educators who are going to talk about their proposed revision to the fourth-year course offerings for math. So that required fourth-year course, students have a lot of choice as to which options they might take advantage of. And so they're going to talk a little bit about that proposal. And then we'll have an English group who will talk a little bit about their proposal to revise the English elective offerings. So courses like journalism and creative writing, and so they've put together a proposal on that. And the reason we've had them come ahead and present on this to you all today is just given the significance and the degree to which some of those courses have changed. We wanted to go ahead and provide you an update, even knowing that the Standards Recommendation Committee is still going to be looking at this work as well, and part of their eventual recommendation to you will include this information on the fourth-year courses and the elective courses. So with those updates being said, I'm happy to introduce our math group is going to go first. And so we've got Dr. Stephanie Kolish from the University of Tennessee at Martin, who has been the lead of the secondary math group. We also have Megan Miller, who is a numeracy coach in Knox County, Tim Jones, who's a principal in Bartlett City Schools here. We have Corey Conkis, who is a teacher in Tipton County Schools, Kimberly Herring, who's a teacher in Cumberland County Schools, and Roy Henson, who is an assistant principal in the Gibson Special School District.
Hello, and go Tigers. I want to begin the recommendations for high school fourth-year math courses with a distribution chart, and it makes a lot of sense. If you notice the big blue area, it's 1/3 of our students, roughly, in a bridge-type setting, a bridge math it's called. If you notice up here in the AP Stats and Stats, there's 9% in the statistics. Down below, there's Advanced Algebra, Trig, and Pre-Calculus, which is essentially the same courses. The Calculus, we have Calculus and AP Calculus. That's 8% of the students are distributed in there. And this large green area is Other, which consists of the computer science takers, the International Baccalaureate Mathematics takers, as well as some of the dual enrollment takers at the institutions of higher learning in their local areas. It also consists of the other geometry retakers and the ones who take Algebra 2 for one or more times, or second or third times. Now, if you notice the top left, the finite and discrete, those small numbers will have implications future in this PowerPoint. Current placement decisions are based on the PowerPoints, the bullet points below, availability in the district, additional courses in the district, but the last bullet, guidance counselors. Being a principal in a local school here, the guidance counselors are on the front line. They guide students to take courses that not only are applicable to their ability, but also they give them endurance and leverage to propel them into the college and their careers in future tense. So, in guiding principles and goals, high expectations for Tennessee students is one of them. Retention for rigorous standards. We want to maintain the rigor that was applied in the last few years through our standards. We want to take those and make sure that there's a vertical alignment from K to 11 that propels our students into a fourth-year math course for success, and beyond there into the college and the career. Essentially shift from ability-based pathway to a discipline and career-based pathway. Here's our recommendations for 5 courses in the fourth year of mathematics. Applied mathematical concepts, bridge math, calculus, and pre-calculus, as well as statistics. The dual credit opportunities, we want 4 of the 5 to have those, a bridge being a essential skill building for success for the weaker math students to be successful in their first year of math in college preparatory. Remove the 3 courses below, the applied algebra and trig, the senior finite, and discrete mathematics. That's our recommendations. And next.
So in looking at taking some of the courses out, we wanted to look at what we were leaving in the courses that we wanted to retain. And so Bridge Math, as you saw in the graph, currently has 1/3 of our Tennessee seniors taking it. We were trying to decide if that was an over-enrolled course, that students were taking it because it seemed like the easy way out, or if they were taking it because they didn't exactly know what other classes to take. So we did adjust the standards. The things that we used in terms of revising the standards, we looked at the previous standards that were already there. We also looked at the ACT standards, as some of you addressed earlier. We want to have more concern about the scores that students are actually making on the ACT, so we want to address that. We also looked at sales standards because that's what some of the schools are currently using in terms of their bridge courses, and we wanted to make it more contextual, so it seemed like it had a reason for them to take it. When you looked at the previous standards that were used for the bridge classes, and it's the one that's on your left on this screen, it didn't really go well with the other standards from the other courses. It didn't seem to flow well from 9th, 10th, 11th to 12th grade, so we wanted to revise them. They felt like 150 standards of 150 separate problems the students needed to learn to do. And we wanted to change that and make it seem more like a part of the rest of their high school math courses, so it seemed to flow better. So we changed the formatting of it, we changed the content of it, we gave it, I think, a little more structure in terms of what it's supposed to teach them. Some things that we did in Bridge Math, it's always been designed for students who have not scored 19 on the ACT, so we want there to be a particular group of students that should be in this class, not take it just because it seems like the easiest course for seniors to take. It's an opportunity for remediation. It's one of our last chances to get those students who are struggling in high school math. It does have college level expectations. We are trying to make it something that will work well for the students who may end up going to a community college and having to take remedial courses. The standards are comparable to ACT college and career readiness standards. We looked very closely at those in more of the 24 to 27 score to try and bring those areas into the class. We extended topics from previous courses, so we took some of the Algebra 2 things that they may have been weak on because they scored a 19 on the ACT and tried to reinforce those in the Bridge class. We also wanted to bring in more real-world context. Instead of randomly doing a math problem just for computational reasons, we wanted to give them some context to the math that they were doing. And then, of course, we did major revisions. We went from roughly 150 standards down to about 50.
Feel a little bit like musical chairs here. Sorry about that. So pre-calculus, as we looked at pre-calculus and advanced algebra and trigonometry, in some places called advanced math, we found that 10% of our high school students were taking pre-calculus and 14% were taking this class called AAT, or Advanced Algebra and Trig. 98% of the districts offer one or two of the classes, or 74% were offering both classes. Interestingly enough, 100% of the current algebra, advanced algebra and trigonometry standards are in pre-calculus, so they're completely covered in pre-calculus. Pre-calculus also includes parametric equations, conic sections, polar coordinates, and trigonometric functions. This is actually information given to us by the state board. So this is, I think, 13-14 data. So in pre-calculus, what we try to understand as we come through this and how it's different than the advanced algebra and trigonometry, even though it has a lot of the same standards, is it's designed for students interested in the STEM careers as they move forward. It's more rigorous than the AAT course that we've been talking about. Even, it's got only 10% of the students, but you really have like 24% of these students taking the same standards. The standards revised to incorporate a movement of earlier standards. What that means is there are some things from our Algebra 2 group that we looked at, which was public feedback said was really overloaded with standards, and they started to talk about a lot of things going on there. We moved a handful of those things forward, kind of like we talked about graphing of trigonometric functions. We moved that forward into pre-calculus, and we pulled some of those. So it has some things move forward from earlier classes. It's a better alignment with ACT college and career readiness standards, which is a big push from what we've been talking about, is the old EOC and the change to TN Ready is hopefully supporting that ACT building blocks, right? Because for most of us, if you have kids like I do, I have one that's 17 right now in school, and all we're worried about is the ACT score and what that means for coming to a place like this or other institutions of higher learning. And so there should be some sort of alignment between those tests, and so our courses should reflect that also. Also, better alignment with expectations in college level pre-calculus courses. So if they're taking the pre-calculus going to STEM, when they leave my class, when they go see Stephanie over at UT Martin or something else, are they really prepared for those college level courses that they're supposed to take? And those are all the things we considered.
I have the joy of talking about statistics, which happens to be a love of mine, but not for most people. It really concerned us that only 9% of our high school students were taking some form of statistics, whether it be a college level statistics, AP statistics, or offered there at the school. As we started to talk to our higher ed partners, they told us that the overwhelming majority of their college freshmen now take some form of statistics rather than the traditional college algebra. Gone are the days when everybody will take calculus. The colleges have moved more towards statistics level courses, and we needed to reflect that on the high school level as well. So when we started to look at how to revise the standards, we wanted to make sure that some of these statistic standards were being offered or presented to our students as early as our 6th and 7th grade level. So we needed to revise our current standards to make sure that we account for that stronger knowledge that our students should be coming to us with. And we also wanted to make sure that our standards were aligned to any sort of college level statistics class that our students would be taking. Just like my cohorts have said, we wanted to make sure, though, that our students were ACT ready, so we made sure that the revisions to the standards were aligned to the ACT and would prepare our kids to take the ACT again in their senior level year if need be. This would be a course that would be designed for our non-STEM related students. They would be going into more of a humanities field or something like that. That would be their interest, and being able to take this course in high school could give them college credit, we hope, with our dual challenge.
I think calculus is more popular than stats. Well, the committee looked at the calculus standards that were currently written for the state of Tennessee, compared it to the local universities' syllabi, and we went outside the state and also looked at some of the calculus courses that were in place in there, and we decided that the standards alignment was well, and it was proven. So no major changes are going to be added to the calculus.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the new course we're proposing called Advanced Mathematical Concepts. And as you saw in Tim's graph that he put up earlier, only 5% of students enroll in senior finite math or discrete math, and only 60 to 70% of school districts don't even offer this. As a small rural district in West Tennessee, I can speak that we do not offer at this time either one of these classes. As you can see, data, discrete enrollment dropped from 2011 to 2014, while finite math did grow significantly. And both discrete math and senior finite math include content is relevant to college and career readiness. What we're proposing is kind of combining those two. This course would be designed for students interested in careers using applied math such as banking, industry, or human resources. This is also a course that there are courses similar to this in many universities. Stephanie's from UT Martin, and we modeled a lot of things off of universities we looked for in the state, like UT Martin, MTSU, et cetera. Rich in problem solving, again, making it relevant to real life. And again, it would combine the standards from senior finite math and discrete mathematics. And I believe 60% of the standards we propose are from the finite math course and 40% are from discrete math. Design with industry needs in mind, and also alignment with that ACT college and career readiness standards. Again, while the students were taking this course, they would also still have that opportunity to raise their ACT score. So what would this course include? Again, these are standards and concepts and topics from discrete math and finite math, but especially this in-depth study of financial math, and we thought there was a great connection there with the personal finance course that the state already requires. Linear programming, which is definitely a real-life skill, and then probability and statistics that build on what Megan was talking about with statistics. And a lot of these topics that we see would be things that a student would take if they took that similar course at a college level in a discrete or finite math.
And so as we looked at these things representing the college, we wanted to make sure that the courses that we have in high school are truly comparable to first-year courses in college. If we wanted to fast-track our students towards a college degree, we wanted to make sure that those standards actually aligned. And so we are proposing that the Board of Education support developing dual credit challenge exams for 4 of the 5 courses. The one that would not have a dual credit challenge exam would be the bridge course. That's designed more to get the students ready to take a college level course. But if our students do well in these other 4 courses, they should be able to get credit for that on the college level as well. Pre-calculus would go to a standard pre-calculus course, statistics would go to statistics, calculus would go to calculus, and the new course, applied mathematical concepts, would match up very well to either a discrete mathematics or a finite mathematics course on the college level. Because we are trying to clarify the pathways through that fourth-year course, we're advocating removing standards for 3 math courses, advanced algebra and trig, because it's a duplication of most of what you see in pre-calculus, and pre-calculus is a more rigorous course. We're also advocating removal of the standards for discrete math and senior finite math. We've taken the application pieces out of both of those courses and combined those into our new course, so we don't really see the need for continuing to support these courses. So that's where we are with our fourth-year course, and we welcome any questions you have.
Questions? When will we be looking at these recommendations in terms of approval, so forth? What's the?
So the board will hear these on first reading in January, as in combination with the rest of the K-11 math revised standards.
Okay. Any questions?
I would also just add one other comment, Mr. Chairman. So this group presented to the high school math working group that the state board had previously convened. So we had that meeting at the end of September and received some really good feedback. And that group, that working group, which represents a lot of folks from industry and a variety of different careers and businesses, felt really strongly about these recommendations. So I'm happy to report that feedback back to the board.
Great.
One of the things I think everything sort of fits into this, but the applied math is pretty much in the wheelhouse of a student who's wanting to come out and go into one of the applied technology programs, particularly those that are so heavy in math that it's sort of a weed killer a lot of times that they can't handle. That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's, one, we really appreciate the work that folks have done on this. This is great work, and I think it does, answer some real concerns that we've had about the math curriculum, what the expectations were out there, and I think this gets it, really gets it to reality of where we need to have these kids when they come out of high school. So I think it's some really good stuff here. Any other questions? Okay. Again, we thank you for all the good work. Yeah.
The next group up is going to present about the English language arts permanent course electives that are offered. And so they've worked to develop a proposal around that for the board. And so you'll hear that along with the required K through 12 English language arts revised standards in January also. And so presenting for that group is going to be Brandy Blakely, who's an assistant principal for Tipton County Schools, and Tammy Marlowe, who is a teacher in Macon County Schools.
The ELA permanent electives course or discussion came from looking at the feedback and digging into the revision of the standards. So that kind of gives you a little contextual understanding of where we were. We began looking at the feedback. We began looking at the current standards, and as we started analyzing that, we thought there are some electives that need some modification. There are some electives that need to be removed, and there are some electives that could be added in to address the standards. So the electives modified journalism, creative writing, speech, and communication. The electives we'd like to see added genre literature and visual literacy. And the electives removed competency English and content area reading. So for journalism, the modification, the student will understand and utilize oral, written, and visual communication. It expands the current Tennessee state standards that focus on informational, argumentative, and narrative writing which are referenced as W1 through 3, by providing students with the opportunity for additional practice. It expands the current Tennessee state standard that focuses on the use of technology by providing students with the opportunity for gaining practical experience utilizing technology to write and publish material. We got a significant amount of feedback regarding technology, so we wanted to open that, that elective or have that opportunity in this elective. Modified to reflect ELA standards and ELA demands for a tiered progression of skills in journalism. We talked a lot about vertical alignment and tiered progression through K through 12 ELA. And so we wanted our electives to do the same thing, to have a vertical progression.
In addition, with the journalism, we added journalism 1, 2, 3, and 4, so that in high school, they could increase what was required and what was expected from the students as they move through the course.
The creative writing modification. The student will be given the opportunity to develop a creative outlet through additional writing experiences in fiction and or nonfiction. We know we've got students who desire to express themselves, and sometimes they are afforded that opportunity in an ELA classroom, and sometimes they need additional outlets. And so we wanted to expand creative writing to afford students that opportunity, while at the same time practicing the standards and the skills that they are learning in an ELA classroom. So it expands the current Tennessee state standards that focus on informational, argumentative, and narrative writing by providing students with the opportunity for additional practice, but also additional exploration. Creative writing is about exploring and reflecting. And so we wanted to have that opportunity to provide students with additional time to manipulate language, to look at different genres, and to experiment. The speech and communication modification. The student will have the opportunity to initiate and to participate in both traditional and digital communication. That was one of the things that we added there, not just traditional, but digital communication. We are a highly technical world. Technology is ever present, and we wanted students to have the opportunity to hone those skills. Extends learning experiences by allowing the students the opportunity to participate in collaborative discussions that build on others' comments to advance the conversations. It extends the learning experiences by allowing students the opportunity to enhance discussions by implementing information from multiple sources, representing multiple media. We got a lot of feedback regarding that standard, speaking and listening, standard 2, and we wanted to have the opportunity for students to pursue that and to expand that and to show the teachers what it could possibly look like in a classroom. In addition, students are encouraged to and expected to utilize diverse media to advance the discussion. And it was modified for the inclusion of extended experiences with digital media in diverse formats. This is one of the additions we'd like to see, genre literature. One of the standards in some of our discussion stemmed from one of the standards deals with exploring thematically based units. Sometimes you have that opportunity and time in a traditional ELA classroom, and sometimes you just don't. And so we thought that in genre literature, we could expand those thematic discussions and have the opportunity for students to look and make connections between and among text. The student will be given the opportunity to develop deeper critical reading skills through additional reading experiences. It will expand the opportunity for teachers to utilize 2 or more similarly themed texts for class discussion and provides the students the opportunity to read deeply into those texts. Specifically in RL9, a focus is placed on how source material influenced and is changed in a literary piece. In the English language arts vernacular, that's the allusion standard. Standard RI9 focuses on how seminal U.S. documents treat related things and concepts. So you can see those standards really do ask us to look across text broadly and to produce and synthesize information. It expands the opportunity for students to comprehend more complex literature independently. And it was added to provide classes focused on reading and the synthesis of different texts that a regular ELA class would not have the scope necessarily to integrate. Another addition we'd like to see is visual literacy. Our students are very visual. but sometimes the visual information is very intentional, and they don't often ask themselves the questions of why this information is portrayed or presented visually. So that's what this addition is to address. The student will evaluate and analyze visual forms of media. It extends the learning experiences by allowing the students to enhance discussions by implementing information from multiple sources representing multiple media. Again, we got a lot of comments and feedback about that. So we wanted to address that, not just with our standards revision, but with elective suggestions as well. It expands the opportunity for students to receive practical opportunities to use digital mediums to present their findings to further study in an area. It expands learning experiences by allowing the students the opportunity to analyze how a subject or key scene is represented in various mediums, including video, film, and art, and the intentionality of those choices that the artist made. With new forms of media, it is increasingly important that students develop a broad range of literacy, specifically related to reading new forms of communication. One of the courses we'd like to see removed is Competency English. Competency English remediated student ELA deficits. Competency English will no longer be necessary with the full and complete implementation of RTI Squared at the high school level, because the students will be receiving additional skill-based instruction through dedicated RTI time. We'd also like to see content area reading removed. Content area reading focused on specific isolated reading strategy instruction. With the new way the standards are written and the vertical progression and alignment with not just ELA standards, but the current social studies standards, literacy across all disciplines is embedded, which makes the content area reading unnecessary. Questions?
Questions? Anyone? Okay. Good job. Yeah, good job. We appreciate it. We really do appreciate all the work that's gone into these standards review, but all the folks involved. I mean, fantastic process and a great job. Let me suggest that we take a short break here. We are behind schedule. It's 3:07. Let's take a 10-minute break. Be back here at 3:17. Is that okay? 3:17, everybody.